First Patriots, chapter 5. As the boys dismounted, Liberty asked, "Why are you staring at the portal like that? You look like you've seen a ghost." I ignored Liberty as I concentrated on the portal. After a couple of seconds, the swirling vortex started shrinking until it disappeared altogether. "Whew, that was close," I mumbled. I was worried Elizabeth would confront me upon my return to Manchester, but for now we appeared to be safe. "Get behind the building, quick!" whispered Tommy, who grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Tommy, Cam, and I had our backs against a 2-story colonial building with a red brick foundation and wood siding. I looked up and saw a solid brick chimney with smoke that drifted up into the sky. I quickly surveyed my surroundings. Even though the sun had just dipped below the neighboring frontier, it was plain to see that this wasn't England. It was a rugged landscape. No trimmed hedges or courtyards. Instead, a grove of trees thick with underbrush created an eerie scene just in front of us. A barking dog could be heard in the distance. "I saw a bunch of guys that looked like British soldiers," said Tommy. "I don't think they saw us." I peeked around the corner of the building and saw about 6 British soldiers who were leaving the establishment. Their red coats made them easy to spot. "No wonder the 13 colonies won the war," said Liberty, who peered over my shoulder. "Those guys stand out like a cherry on an ice cream sundae." Why do the British soldiers stand out like a cherry on an ice cream sundae?
Because of the red coats.
Yeah.
Because the red coats are super bright and
Of their red coats.
Yep, that's right. The coats are super bright. Just like in the picture that we have up at the top. Good, good, good. As the soldiers marched away in unison, I said, "Liberty, can you verify our location?" "Yes, Captain. 1765 Virginia." He turned to Tommy and Cam and said, "I pay very close attention when Rush Revere announces our future historical destination. In fact, right now my time travel senses tell me that Patrick Henry is very close by." "Your time travel senses?" Tommy asked. "Yep. It's hard to explain." "Is it like a tingling feeling at the base of your skull?" Tommy said curiously. Liberty looked surprised and said, "Actually, yes. How did you know?" Tommy smiled. "It's the same kind of feeling that Spider-Man gets when he senses danger. His spider sense gives him a psychological awareness of his surroundings. It sounds like your time travel sense gives you a chronological sense of history, as well as a keen awareness of the historical figure we're looking for." "You mean I have a superpower?" Liberty asked, just like he just found out that school had been canceled. "Wow, I never thought of it like that. Wait, let me try using my superpower, my super sense." Liberty closed his eyes as if he were concentrating. "Your horse, he really can talk," said Cam. "And we really did jump through some kind of wormhole to the year 1765. "Oh, that's sick." "You're sick?" Liberty asked. "Maybe you have time travel motion sickness. You know, like seasickness." "Not sick like ill. He means sick like awesome," Tommy clarified. "Okay, that makes no sense at all," said Liberty. "I would not be feeling awesome if I were sick." Suddenly, Liberty was distracted by the sound of someone playing the fiddle. "Where's that music coming from?" he asked, listening more intently. "Which instrument is most like a fiddle? Do you know?"
trumpet.
Violin.
It is like a violin, yes. It's like a violin. I think it has to do with the type of music you play. If you play a violin, it's very classical music. If you play the fiddle, you usually hear it more in the country music. "I should probably set some ground rules," I said to Tommy and Cam. "I want us to be extra cautious since we've already seen British soldiers, okay? I don't expect any problems, but you never know." "It's like we're in a virtual world, isn't it?" asked Cam. "Yes," I nodded, "except this is not a virtual world. Those redcoats are real, and their swords and bayonets and muskets are real too. So what I'm saying is no goofing off. Got it?" "Got it," said the boys in unison. All right. It looks like we're ready to... Hey, where's Liberty? He was here a second ago, Cam said. I cautiously walked around the building to where the front doors were. Across the street was a larger building with a sign that was barely visible. It said Hanover County Courthouse. A few other buildings could be seen up and down the dimly lit street. Hey, there's Liberty, said Cam, pointing to the building we were hiding behind. And it sounds like there's a party going on inside. Liberty was standing near the front door and bobbing his head to the rhythm of the fiddle. I could also hear several voices talking and laughing from the establishment. What kind of building is this? Tommy asked. My guess is a tavern. You mean like a bar? Yes, I confirmed. No worries, there aren't any biker gangs in the 18th century. Liberty walked back to where we were standing and sighed. I guess this means I have to stay out here. We'll be back soon, I said. In the meantime, we need you to keep a lookout for any redcoats. That is sort of important, Liberty said. I've got you covered. I noticed Tommy pull something from his pocket. Have some bubble gum, he said, as he unwrapped the gum and tossed it to Liberty, who snatched it out of the air with his lips. Oh, I've always wanted to try this, Liberty said as he chewed. How exactly do you blow a bubble? Tommy smiled, maneuvered his own piece of gum in his mouth, and then began to blow. Fascinating, said Liberty. I rolled my eyes and said, let's enter the tavern. As we entered, we saw several tables against each wall. Well-dressed men with bright-colored coats and tricorn hats, like the one I wore, were sitting among the tables. Let's see. A tavern is most like a grocery store, gas station, bank, or restaurant. Restaurant, yeah, good. All right, we have a checklist. Here we go. What were the men wearing?
Kids aren't allowed in there.
Okay, well-dressed men with bright-colored coats and tricorn hats like the one I wore were sitting among the tables. Other men with collarless shirts and vests were seated as well, and all the men were wearing breeches, stockings, and leather shoes. Candles flickered at each table as well as in sconces fixed to the walls. Men were telling stories, drinking from mugs, or playing cards. One man sat alone at an empty table, playing the fiddle. Let's join the man with the fiddle, I suggested. Perhaps he...
It's time for me to go to class.
Okay, Zara. We'll see you in a bit, hon.
Okay.
Okay. Wait a second, said Cam. Do you mean the Patrick Henry, as in one of America's founding fathers? The very one, I confirmed. No way. You know I'm a history buff, right? Patrick Henry is a rock star. Seriously, I've read his speeches, and he was amazing. He's the guy who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." That's right. He was one of the most influential champions of the American Revolution. Benjamin Franklin highly recommended that we visit him. Man, this is an awesome field trip. Thanks for inviting me, Cam said. As we approached the man with the fiddle, he stopped playing. He wore a purple vest and linen shirt. His purple coat with gold buttons was thrown over a chair. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 years old. His hair was neatly combed and pulled back into a short ponytail. Excuse me, sir, I said, but can you tell me which of these men is Patrick Henry? Patrick Henry? He exclaimed in an animated whisper. You don't want to be associated with him. Haven't you heard? He's a radical. He's an outspoken lawyer that says what he will, even if he offends the king. I was surprised by the man's warning and said, yes, well, we understand he's an opponent of the King's Stamp Act. Shh, said the man with the fiddle. Don't speak so loudly when you talk about the Stamp Act that way. Do you want the king's spies to hear you? The man glanced over our shoulders at the other men in the tavern. Come, sit with me. You tell me what you've heard, and I'll tell you what I've heard about that rabble-rouser, Patrick Henry. We each grabbed a chair and sat around the table. I glanced at the other men who were talking and laughing. Any one of them could be Henry, I supposed, unless he wasn't here, but Liberty seemed so certain about it. "Forgive my manners," said our new host. "You must be parched. What can I get you to drink?" "Oh, you're too kind," I said. "I'd like some tea." "And what would your servants care to drink?" He looked toward Tommy and Cam and said, "I assume these are your servants? Or perhaps one is your son and the other a slave? A well-dressed slave, I must say." He glanced at Cam's dark skin and clothes. Cam was clearly surprised by the comment, and his face contorted into an odd look of calm and consternation that I hadn't seen in him before. I put my hand on his shoulder and was about to say something reassuring, but instead Cam boldly explained, "I understand this is 1765 and you aren't enlightened to the reality of freedom for all men yet, but I am free and will always be free, just like this country." I was impressed with his strength and composure in a difficult moment. The fiddler smiled and looked thoroughly impressed with Cam. He said, "Well, I certainly do apologize, young man. I meant no offense." Tommy looked relieved. Suddenly, the fiddler jumped up onto his chair, and with a foot on the table and his fiddle underneath his chin, he began to play a fervent tune while tapping his foot. I looked at Tommy and Cam, who were all smiles. Tommy looked back at me and mouthed the words, "I think this guy is nuts." Cam nodded with enthusiasm and gave me the universal symbol for crazy by twirling his finger near the side of his head. And just when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, the fiddler stopped playing and sprang with both feet on top of the wooden table. That's when he started singing and acting out his song. "Our worthy forefathers, let's give them a cheer, to climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts, for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us to their freedom and fame." The room burst into applause and cheers. Some of the men were louder than others, but all seemed to applaud the man's song. The men soon returned to their own conversations, and the room became quiet as it had before. The fiddler stepped down and patted Cam on the shoulder. "We shall drink to freedom tonight," said the fiddler. "With whom do I have the pleasure of drinking?" What are they drinking to? What are they toasting? It's in that last paragraph. It's what Patrick Henry just said.
Freedom.
Freedom. We shall drink to freedom tonight. Yes. And it does not need to be capitalized. It's not a proper noun. I replied, "This is Tommy and Cam, my apprentices. And my name is Rush Revere. I'm a history teacher, and I was—" "Revere, you say? Are you related to Paul Revere?" "I believe I am," I exclaimed. "I mean, I've not actually met him, but I'm a great admirer, and we fight for the same cause." "Oh, I'm glad to hear that," the man said, smiling. "Now then, perhaps Tommy and Cam would enjoy a cup of chocolate." "Oh, that sounds great," Tommy said. "Thank you." "Yeah," Cam said with a wink. "Freedom and chocolate are definitely worth fighting for." The man laughed and waved at the barkeep, who walked over to our table and took our orders. When he left, I asked, "Where do you think we could find Patrick Henry?" "Oh, you'd be better off without him," the man sniffed. "I heard he just gave a speech at the House of Burgesses in Virginia's capital, Williamsburg. They say he spoke like thunder as he defended the rights of the colonies. He attacked the Stamp Act and said that the British Empire had no right to tax the American colonies. He said if we don't stop King George III now, he'll keep taxing the people until he has us all in chains." I'm curious, what did the people say when they heard his speech? I asked. "Ha! The governor of Virginia was furious," said the man, who picked up his fiddle again, "especially when Patrick Henry said the stamp tax was a threat to our liberty. That's when some of the older men cried, 'Treason!' The man played a fast and gloomy tune on his fiddle. He stopped playing and continued, 'People say Patrick Henry is verbally attacking the king. Would you believe he actually compared King George to Julius Caesar and Charles I?" All right, we have a simile in the 8th paragraph. They say he spoke like thunder, defended the rights of the colonies, attacked the Stamp Act, said the British Empire had no right to tax the American colonies. Which one is the simile? Remember, it's comparing.
They say he spoke like thunder.
He spoke like thunder. So when he was giving his speech, he was very powerful. It was a very powerful speech. Wow, that's harsh, Cam said. Julius Caesar was a Roman dictator, and King Charles was beheaded for crimes against England. Sounds like Patrick Henry is really going out on a dangerous limb here. He's putting himself at risk. Perhaps your Patrick Henry values the cause of freedom more than his life, said the fiddler. That's why I like him so much, said Cam as he looked around the room. I'd really like to meet him. I was hoping he could give me a few tips on how to speak like thunder. I'm thinking about running for student body president, and speaking like thunder could come in handy. Cam stood up from his chair and mimicked his presidential speech, declaring, "Students of America, you say you want freedom to speak your mind. You say you want your voice to be heard. You say you want a leader who will defend your rights and extend your lunch hour. If you vote for me, I promise liberty and justice for all." Liberty must have thought someone called his name because his head briefly appeared in the window, and I saw him rigorously chewing his bubblegum. At least he wasn't getting into trouble. As Cam sat down, the fiddler stood up and began to applaud. In a booming voice, he said, "You have my vote. You are a most excellent orator, Cam, and you are brave to be so bold. Never let fear stop you from saying what needs to be said." The barkeep of the tavern politely interrupted and set our beverages on the table. Wisps of steam rose from the silver mugs. Tommy leaned over his mug and smelled the wafting aroma of chocolate. Wow, that smells delicious. Cam sipped from his mug and said, "It's a little different than what we have back home. This is creamier and a little bit sour." In the first paragraph, it says, "going out on a dangerous limb." Is that a simile or an idiom?
Idiom.
It's an idiom. Yeah, it's not comparing.
Idiom.
It's not comparing one thing to another. It's just using one of those phrases. Good, good, good. And then we have a picture of, that's the fiddler. Except that in the writing it said he had a purple vest. Yeah. So it's a little different than what they described because they said that he had a purple
On the
vest.
back, it looks like he has a purple vest.
Does
on
it?
the little back.
Oh, maybe. Maybe.
Just a tad.
"And where is back home for you?" asked the fiddler. "We just moved from Colorado. My dad is in the military, so we move every year or so. I guess I really don't have a place I call home," Cam replied. "Colorado?" the man asked. "Is this a new settlement in the West? I have not heard of it." Just then, the door burst open, and a young man about 17 or 18 burst into the tavern. The men on either side of the room turned to see who or what the ruckus was. The boy took off his tricorn hat and wiped his brow. He scanned the room quickly and then rushed over to our table and tossed several newspapers in front of our host. "I brought the newspapers just like you asked, Mr. Henry," the boy panted. "The other messengers arrived just like you said they would, from Maryland and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and other colonies. They've all printed your 7 resolutions against the Stamp Act. It looks like the colonies have united in opposing the stamp tax." "Henry?" I asked the boy. "Do you mean Patrick Henry?" I asked again, this time turning to the man with the fiddle. Patrick Henry gave a big, hearty laugh to match Cam's wide smile. "I'm afraid you've been sitting with a treasonous radical who defies the King of England," thundered Patrick with a giant grin. I could hardly believe my ears. All this time we were sitting with one of the legendary forefathers of America. I blushed and said, "Forgive me, Mr. Henry. I should have recognized you earlier." "Recognize me?" asked Patrick. "Have we met before?" I realized I couldn't tell him that his picture is in every American history book. All right, which colonies are mentioned in the 5th paragraph? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I brought the newspapers just like you asked. The other messengers arrived just like you said they would from Maryland, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts.
That's a lot of S's.
Uh-huh.
My dad went to Rhode Island.
And then the next picture.
He said it was really cold.
I have a chicken called a Rhode Island Red.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there you go. All right, so the picture is Patrick Henry proposes the Virginia Stamp Resolution to the House of Burgesses in Virginia. There we go. Page 98. He means he should have recognized your voice of thunder, Cam joked. Patrick laughed and said, Cam, I enjoy your company. After a moment, he became more serious and exclaimed, now that you know who I am, I want you to know something about me, something that has troubled me for years. He turned to look at Cam and said somberly, the truth is, I am very sorry to report that I own slaves. Why? Cam asked sincerely. How can you say you're fighting for freedom and still own slaves? Isn't that hypocritical? Slavery has become an important part of the economy here in the South, said Patrick. But I have felt a great need to change the way things are in these southern colonies. Truly, I have felt tormented as my soul has wrestled with the owning of slaves, and I have come to realize that this wicked practice must come to an end. If we truly want to be a free people, a free land, a free America, then we must free the slaves. God cannot bless a country that allows the bondage and captivity of men, women, and children. He took a deep breath and sighed. Indeed, I believe a time will come when we shall abolish this lamentable evil called slavery. Cam said, well, that sounds like a very good start. Then Cam raised his hand and said, high five! He prompted Patrick to raise his hand as well. Patrick slowly lifted his hand and Cam slapped his upraised palm. Curious, Patrick asked, you call that a high five? Yeah, Cam replied. It's a gesture of triumph or success. It also means we're friends. I like the high five, said Patrick. Patrick Henry owned slaves, but he was fighting for freedom from the king. How are Patrick Henry and King George alike? Ooh, now there's not going to be a simple answer to this. You're just going to...
Popcorn?
Patrick Henry owned slaves, but he was fighting for freedom from the king. How are Patrick Henry and King George alike? If you would like to hold off on that one, we can come back and discuss that more at the end and when we have more time to talk about it. So just leave that one blank for now. Just remember not to submit when we get to the end. Wait until you learn the chest bump, Tommy smiled. Patrick noticed that the boy who had delivered the newspapers was watching with great curiosity about 5 feet away. Wait a second. Patrick flipped the boy a large silver coin, and the boy caught it in the air. Thank you, Mr. Henry, said the teenage boy, grinning from ear to ear. If you will excuse me, sir, there is a peculiar horse out in the front of the tavern that caught my attention. Why did you say peculiar horse? I asked nervously. The boy replied with wonder. In truth, this horse had a large pink bubble attached to its mouth. It was small at first, but then it grew to the size of a cantaloupe until it finally popped. Then the horse used his tongue to lick up the pink sap that stuck to his nose and lips until it was all back in his mouth, and he began chewing it. I'm hoping he'll do it again. I've never seen anything like it. Cam and I will come with you, Tommy said. I'm pretty sure I know what it is. The boys got up from the table, thanked Mr. Henry for the hot chocolate, and exited the tavern. As Patrick Henry browsed the first newspaper, I took out my phone, slipped it under the table, and typed a quick Facebook entry. Virginia, 1765. Sitting here drinking tea with Patrick Henry. Historians say that he was the man who sparked America's Revolution. His 7 resolutions to the Stamp Act articulated why America should reject and resist British taxation on the colonies. This brought on the Revolutionary War and finally separated America and England, and gave independence to the colonies, which eventually became the United States of America. "Listen to this," said Patrick as he read from the newspapers he was holding. Which words mean the same or nearly the same as peculiar? Check all that apply. Big, strange, odd, happy, fast. Tell you right now, there's two. Peculiar. Strange and odd. Good. Strange and odd. The writer reports on my speeches and my opposition to the king and his parliament. He writes, "The tendons on Patrick Henry's neck stood out white and rigid like whipcords. His voice rose louder and louder until the walls of the building seemed to shake. Men leaned forward in their seats, their faces pale. Patrick's laughter seemed to bounce off the walls. When he stopped, he said, 'They are scared of what the king will do when he finds out the colonies refuse to pay his stamp tax. What the king needs to understand is that before we will obey his laws, we must have representation in Parliament. We want to help create the laws for the colonies. We demand the right to have our voices heard in England.' I realized my jaw was open as I listened to Patrick Henry defend the colonies. I finally said, 'I admire your fearlessness, speaking out against the king. But you realize if your words get back to England, the king is bound to send his redcoats after you for treason. This is serious. They may hang you.' With a smile on his face and a steely gaze in his eyes, he said, 'If this be treason, make the most of it.' As if on cue, the door burst open again, and Tommy stood in the doorway. Panicked, he said, 'Mr. Revere, you better get out here. Cam's in trouble. The redcoats are back, and they've arrested him.' Patrick and I sprang from the table and followed Tommy out of the tavern. It was nearly dark outside, and one of 3 British soldiers held a torch. Patrick was the first to reach the second soldier, who was nearest to Cam. His hands were cuffed, and he shrugged when I looked at him. Tommy and the messenger boy were watching close by. What happened to Cam? Yep, he got arrested by the British soldiers. "What's the meaning of this?" shouted Patrick. His voice did sound like thunder, and the soldier took a step back. Feeling threatened, the third soldier unsheathed his sword and held it in front of him. The first soldier did the same. "It was an accident," Cam said, defending himself. Tommy leaned close to me and whispered, "Liberty was tired of chewing his gum, so Cam told him to spit it out. And I sort of dared him to try and hit one of the soldiers as they walked by the tavern. The soldier was at least 20 yards away. I didn't think he'd actually do it." The second soldier, who must have put the cuffs on Cam, stepped forward and said, "Your slave threw a wad of pink sap and hit me in the side of the head." The soldier turned, and sure enough, a sticky mass of gum looked like it had been pulled from his hair, but it was still a gooey mess. "He's not a slave," shouted Tommy. "Shut up, colonial dog," yelled one of the soldiers. Before Tommy could react, the soldier closest to him swung the butt of his gun into Tommy's head and knocked him down. "Enough of this," I screamed, as I rushed over to make sure Tommy wasn't hurt. Tommy pulled his hand away from where the gun had hit his head and found blood on his fingers. I quickly examined the cut and said, "It's not bad. It barely broke the skin. But you're going to have a goose egg on the side of your head." I looked up and saw Patrick ready to make his move. He remained calm, but I could tell he was also worried about Tommy and nervous for his young friend Cam. What happened before the soldier called Tommy a colonial dog? Okay, so go back up to colonial dog and look right above it. It's kind of in the middle of the page. Tommy shouted something. What happened before the soldier called Tommy a colonial dog? What did Tommy do? Yeah, he yelled at the soldier. That's when he said, "He's not a slave," shouted Tommy. So Tommy yelled at the soldier, And then the soldier said, "Shut up, colonial dog," and then took the handle is the butt of the gun and hit him with it. Cam nervously laughed and said, "I didn't throw it." His eyes darted toward Liberty, who was doing an excellent job at pretending to be just a horse. Cam firmly said, "You didn't see me throw it. You didn't see any of us throw it. I have rights. Where's a lawyer when I need one?" "I'm a lawyer," said Patrick Henry. He walked closer to the soldier near Cam, but the two soldiers with swords stood firm. Hearing the shouts and yells, the men from the tavern came outside to see Tommy bleeding and Cam in cuffs. Their expressions turned from concern for the young boys to anger at the soldiers. Patrick shouted, "England will always consider us inferior. I have seen the way you lobsterbacks laugh at how we talk and the way we dress. You have forgotten that we are still British subjects. Now, you believe we are dim-witted farmers and ill-suited merchants. You would sooner keep us in a barn than invite us into your chambers as equals." "You will never be our equals, colonial scum," said the soldier in the middle. "Now, get out of our way before we lock you up with the slave. You are no better than filthy rats. We should lock up the whole lot of you and let you rot in chains." The men from the tavern started murmuring and cursing the soldiers. These were blacksmiths and carpenters and farmers, men with burly arms and itching to fight. The redcoats knew they were outnumbered, but they stood their ground. The soldier, holding a torch in one hand and his sword in the other, sneered at Patrick Henry. "We are taking our prisoner, and he will be judged according to his crimes. Now, get out of the way." Cam's jaw dropped in desperation and said, "Uh-oh, guys, help me. Somebody!" Patrick Henry looked as determined as ever and bellowed, "Crimes? You dare speak of crimes? I will tell you who the criminals are. The men who sit in Parliament and a king who burdens his people with unfair taxes." British soldiers are called redcoats. What is another name that refers to the British soldiers? It's a kind of shellfish. That's a clue. Lobsterbacks. Yep, lobsterbacks. Lobsterbacks. It is up in the, what does it say, the fourth paragraph? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yep, right there. I'll show you. Hang on. Right there. Yep. Yes, they capitalized it, so you capitalize it too. I don't think, though, yeah, if you didn't capitalize it, though, you'd still get a point as long as you spell it right. So you'll be fine. One word, yep, one word. Lobsterbacks. Lobsterbacks with an S. "Your words convict you of treason," said the first soldier. "You could hang for that. As I've said before, if this be treason, make the most of it," said Patrick. "I spit on your stamp tax." Patrick spit to the right. "You are lucky to be walking freely in these streets," said the first soldier. "We have direct orders from the king to put you in jail for any disrespect to the crown." "The king is the one disrespecting our freedom," said Patrick, taking a step closer. "How dare he demand that we open our homes to house redcoats like you? You are not our guests. You don't even like the people of these colonies. You just want to keep control of us. We worked hard to build these colonies. How dare the king force us to take you into our homes? This law is absurd. I spit on what the king is calling the Quartering Act." Patrick spit again. "You redcoats will not step foot inside of my home." "Watch your tongue, Patrick, before we cut it out," said the third soldier, who now pointed his sword directly at Patrick Henry. But Patrick did not back down. He turned to the men from the tavern and shouted, "If we do not oppose the Quartering Act, the redcoats will soon be tossing your families from their bedchambers in order to move in. Your wives and your children will be out in the streets, and all because the king is an oppressive, arrogant, and selfish tyrant who only cares about 3 things: taxes, taxes, and more taxes." The colonists behind us shouted and jeered at the injustice in front of them. "Let them go," said a large colonist with a neck the size of Rhode Island. So what is the Quartering Act? So the Quartering Act was this law that the king put into place that said that his soldiers could live in anyone's home that they wanted to. And if they wanted to go even a step further, they could force the people out of their bedrooms and make them sleep on the floor in another room and take their bedrooms. If they wanted to go even further, they could kick them out of the house entirely and then just take over the home. So you can imagine people were not happy about either having to share their home or even give up their home so that they could stay there for the soldiers. It did not go over well. What adjectives did Patrick Henry use to describe King George III? And it's right, not the last paragraph, but the one right above it. It says, the king is an oppressive, which means he doesn't allow freedom, takes away freedoms. Arrogant, which means stuck up. Selfish, only thinks about himself. Tyrant, do we have tyrant in there? Nope. Oppressive and arrogant. Yeah, those are the big ones. Go ahead. Oh yeah, selfish was in there too. Oppressive, arrogant, and selfish. Yes, good job. The other two are opposites, caring and kind. That is the opposite of King George. Yes. I'm sorry, say it again.
When it says watch your tongue, Patrick, it's actually watch your tongue, Patriot.
Oh, was it Patriot? Did I say the wrong word? Okay. Good job. That tells me you're following along. Very good. Good. Okay, so I'm on page 104, top of page 104. And that's when I noticed Liberty behind the soldier with the torch. While Patrick Henry was speaking, he must have slipped behind unnoticed. Before the soldiers could react, Liberty turned his hind legs toward his target and gently kicked the unsuspecting soldier in the rear end. Even a gentle kick sent the redcoat 4 feet into the air. He landed with a thud in front of us, his torch and sword rolling to our feet. I took the torch and Tommy took the sword. As if to prove a point, the third soldier raised his sword and attempted to strike down Patrick. The blade was deflected as Tommy paired with his own sword. Again and again, the two swords clashed, and remarkably, it looked like Tommy had the upper hand. As the soldier stumbled backward, Liberty conveniently tripped him, and the soldier fell to the ground. The colonists cheered at the momentary victory and pressed forward against the 3 redcoats, who quickly retreated, leaving Cam standing alone and handcuffed. "It would be wise for all of us to leave this place for a time," said Patrick, as the men dispersed from the tavern. "We can expect more redcoats, and they will want revenge. Do you have a place to go?" "Yes, we'll be safe," I said, "and thank you for your help today." "No kidding," said Cam. "You basically saved my life." "I try to save at least 1 life a day," Patrick winked. "Lucky for you, I had not yet filled my quota." We all laughed, and Patrick finally said, "Cam, you are a remarkable young man. It took me a long time to have the confidence to stand up for what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be, but I have found that I am happiest when I am defending freedom and helping others find liberty and justice." "Me too," said Cam. "When I was younger, I was a military brat. My family had just moved to a new city. It's never easy starting over at a new school. And to make it worse, I was this little runt of a kid. These bigger kids at my old school used to bully me. They did some really mean things. One time they tossed me into a trash can upside down. But one summer I had a huge growth spurt. I grew 7 inches and gained almost 10 pounds. That's the year I decided to act and not be acted upon. So now whenever I see someone being bullied, I don't stand for it. I can't help it. I like defending the little guy. I like helping others find liberty and justice too." Patrick smiled and said, "The truth is, you remind me of me when I was younger. You have a gift for words, a clever mind, and a sense of humor. No wonder I feel like we are kindred spirits." He reached out to shake Cam's hand, but the handcuffs made it awkward. Cam laughed. "Oops, forgot about the cuffs." Patrick smiled and gently placed his hand on Cam's shoulder. He looked Cam straight in the eyes and said, "And I will not forget about the evils of slavery, I promise. As God is my witness, I will give my life for the cause of freedom for all men." "Goodbye, Mr. Henry," said Tommy. "Goodbye, Tommy," Patrick said, beaming. "You are quite the swordsman." "I had a good teacher," said Tommy. With all the practice he had with Miles Standish, the Pilgrims' military leader, it's no surprise that he fought like he did. Miles would be proud. "Safe travels, Rush Revere," said Patrick, "until we meet again." He turned to enter the tavern for his fiddle and coat. I turned back to Tommy, Cam, and Liberty and said, "That was quite the adventure, but I'm ready to return to modern day." "Me too," they all said in unison. As we walked to the back of the tavern, I took a deep breath and said, "There's a chance we'll run into Elizabeth when we return to the school." "Why do you say that?" Tommy asked. "Because when we time jumped to visit Patrick Henry, she was chasing after us and nearly jumped through the time portal before it closed." "What?" Tommy exclaimed. "Hey, maybe we can get Elizabeth to shoot laser beams out of her eyes," said Liberty. "How is that going to help?" complained Tommy. "Well, somebody's got to get those handcuffs off Cam." "Now we're talking," Cam said with a chuckle, "but laser beams really aren't my first choice." "No worries," I told him as I reached into Liberty's saddlebag in search of a solution to Cam's dilemma. "Ah, here it is." "That is one odd-looking key," Cam said. "It's a skeleton key, and it can pick any 18th century lock." I inserted the key into the lock of Cam's handcuffs, and presto! "I can't tell you how good it feels to be free," exclaimed Cam. I nodded, said, "It's a great feeling, isn't it? Likewise, the laws and taxes that the king and parliament keep mandating to the colonies are like handcuffs. They restrict and bind the colonists from living and growing and being a free America." "Never thought of it like that. We're going to need a much bigger key to unlock that problem," Cam said. "No kidding," Tommy agreed. "I think it's called a revolution." Tommy and Cam lifted themselves up onto Liberty's saddle. "Now about Elizabeth. We need to return to someplace different than where we left." How about in the hallway in front of our classroom? We've done that before." "Can your time travel sense tell us if anyone is in the hallway?" Cam asked. "It's worked before. I'm still trying to figure all this out, but I think I can do it so no one sees us." "Okay then, let's go," I said. "Tommy, how's the cut on your head?" "Feels like a linebacker hit me without my football helmet on," Tommy said with a smile. "Besides that, I'm good." I sighed, relieved that we were leaving without further harm. "That was a tough one for all of us," I said. "I'm just glad you're both okay. Liberty, take us home." "Rush, rush, rushing from history," Liberty said. In the dark of the night, the time portal opened again, and as we headed toward the swirling circular light, I readied myself for whatever was waiting for us on the other side.